Welcome to CivilNet. I'm joined once again by CivilNet host and analyst Eric Hakopian to cover some of the main news stories of the week in Armenia. So Eric, welcome back. Thanks for your time.
It's a pleasure.
So the clashes currently taking place on the Arad-Nakhichevan border near the town of Yeresk has been a massive cause for concern in Armenia. The Armenian side has already lost one soldier and the mayor of Yeresk was injured in clashes there. There have been other reports of gunfire, of Azerbaijani side opening fire in the regions of Syunik and Gerarkunik. So Eric, simply, when will this nightmare end?
Well, the nightmare ending really depends on the regime in Baku. And this is what we have to understand about the nature of the regime. It's essentially a criminal enterprise. So you have to deal with them and understand them in that context. This is not a regime which you can have a parallel relationship with. In their mind, they either have their foot in your throat or you have your foot on their throat. So until they see us actively strengthening our military, actively reforming our military, and being very aggressive in making military reform and strengthening the first, second, third priorities of the state, so that any provocation that they do is something that has risks for them, and more specifically risks for the Aliyev regime, I'm afraid this is going to continue. Short of capitulation on things that they want, this is something that we need to get used to, in the sense that we need to act promptly and quickly. This should be the kick that we need to promptly reform the military and strengthen it once again. That makes any adventurism like this costly for the other side. This is not a regime in which you can have a normal relationship with. This is a regime that if they think they have a military advantage over you in any way, as they do right now, they will try to take advantage of it. So the job for us on our side is to strengthen ourselves to change that calculation on their side.
And Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks in Moscow. The spokesperson of Putin, Dmitry Peskov, also said something quite interesting. He said that the process of implementing the agreements between Armenia and Azerbaijan is going well. So what do you make of Aliyev and Putin's relationship and Azerbaijan-Russia relations?
Well, it's hard to judge that. And the spokesperson's words, they say a lot of things. It doesn't really mean much of anything. For the most part, it's what they don't say that's usually far more interesting. It's very hard for us to sit here not being there, because you're essentially talking about a very closed society in Azerbaijan and a rather secretive political process in Russia. For us to have any concrete ideas about what their relationship is like, it's just conjecture you hear here and there. What's interesting is if you read Azeri media, it tends to be very aggressively anti-Russian. I don't know where that comes from. So to answer your question, it's very hard for us to know where those relations are. What we do know is that Aliyev has a balancing act in which he needs to, chug a bit towards the Turkish side. He needs to chug a bit towards the Russian side and keep this balance for his country and for himself to stay in power. So it's very hard to concretely say what their relationship is like. But I think it's a relationship that he has to constantly balance between powers that are much bigger than him. And I think he concedes when he needs to concede, and he can be aggressive when he thinks it can suit his interest and he can get away with it.
And Peskov, the spokesperson, also said that Russia is ready to welcome mediation efforts by European Union countries with regards to Karabakh. What did you think about that?
Well, I was encouraged by that. If that's the case, it's actually very, very good. The more EU involvement in the Artsakh process is actually very good for the Armenian side. I think, again, anything that is done to go away from the equation of conversations between Ankara, Moscow, and Baku about Artsakh, and having that be a much broader conversation that includes countries that are much more favorable to the Armenian side. I think that's that much for the better. And if the Russians are see Artsakh as a place in which they can cooperate with the West, which I think on some levels they do for their own purposes. I think the Armenian diplomacy, to the extent that it exists, should be very aggressive in taking up on what the spokesperson said and trying to push that as much as possible from our side, because I think the outline of that is favorable to our interests.
And the Defense Minister, Vagharshag Harutyunyan, has stepped down and has been replaced by Arshak Garabedian. What do you think of the new appointment, and what are you looking for in the new appointment?
Well, it's very hard. I don't know enough about the new defense minister to have a concrete opinion of him. So I'm not going to say if it's a good appointment or a bad appointment. What we do know is that in almost every post-Soviet state, most, probably outside of the Baltics, most positions like this, most institutions run on negative selection, where the people that are usually the most inept, corrupt, or more the biggest sycophants get to advance in the institution. So you have to assume that the person is not the best put together for the job until they prove otherwise, unfortunately, even in this case. What we need is someone who can aggressively reform the military and aggressively take control of the situation at the border and create an army and rally public support for the reforms to be able to build an army that has the ability to punish the other side's transgressions.
And now let's move on to domestic politics. I have two questions. The first is that former President Robert Kocharyan has announced that he will not be taking up his seat in Parliament. What do you think? Do you think this may damage his prospects or won't really make a difference really in the grand scheme of things?
Well, frankly, it's pathetic. I mean, and it tells you a lot about who they are. It's like a little child, they don't get their way and I'm going to take my ball and I'm going to go home. He was elected he lost the election, but there were significant percentages of voters who voted for him. I think it was more than 20%. Those people put their faith in him, and they expect him to lead their side or their point of view in the parliament.
And in terms of domestic politics, I want to talk about two issues with you. The first being that former President Robert Kocharyan has decided to not take up his seat in Parliament. What do you think? Do you think this will damage his prospects, or do you think it won't really make much change in the grand scheme of things?
Well, it's really a pathetic decision. Here you ran an aggressive campaign. You were disappointed by the results, but so what? It's the nature of politics. Significant portions of the country, in this case 20% of the country, voted for you. They expect you to push their agenda. They expect you to defend their points of view, and they expect you to create a legitimate opposition in the country to keep the current government responsible. But I think it tells us that these were people that were only interested in seeking power, and if they can't get power rather easily, their job, they do not want to do the hard work of building an opposition party, the hard work of coming up with counter programs, with telling a narrative that's different, of building public support. So I think it's quite unfortunate and it's quite disappointing. What was the point of running if you're not willing to be serving on the parliament? What does it even do to your party or the group of people that you elected with and all these hundreds of thousands of people who voted for you? So I think it's very disappointing. And I don't know what it does to his long-term prospects. I don't know if he has any long-term prospects. It's probably the reason that he wants to step away. But overall, it's a complete disappointment.
And finally, there is some good news in terms of the economy. New flight routes have opened up, and Economy Minister Vahan Kerobyan has said that in June 2021, exports saw a record-breaking rate, as well as taxed employees. And there is also good news in terms of tax revenue rates and growth forecasts. So what do you think about this positive economic news? And also another question I have is, how important is this news in face of Baku's aggression?
Oh, I think it's exceptionally important. First of all, we've all been seeing this, this changes. I mean, we've had tax numbers that were coming in as far as tax receipts, which are sort of the best indicators of economic growth and activity. They're coming in at 25% more than 2019 levels. So you have a tax base that's growing. You have the economy coming back. You certainly have tourism coming back. Many firms, one of the bigger problems in Armenia is finding qualified people that have the skill sets that you need for the businesses that you're running. So overall, this is exceptional good news. And if we can go back to the growth rates that we had between 2017 and 2019, which by the way was through both governments, both through the Garan Karapetyan years and through the Nikol years. So it was not even a partisan thing. If we go back to growth rates like that, it's going to be exceptionally helpful to the country. And that's also buttressed by the significant amounts of EU money that are going to be invested in infrastructure and renewables and all that. So overall, it's tremendous good news. And most importantly, as far as the context of what it means in the bigger scheme of things, as far as defense policy is concerned, the truth of the matter is everything that you want to do requires resources. And if we have significant economic growth, you have much higher tax receipts, you have the resources to be able to rebuild the army and to create a far better defensive a position for the country to be able to entirely defend its interests and to defend its borders. So we've sort of been seeing this coming. A lot of people who don't live in Armenia or haven't been there or don't see it. But if this thing comes back, it can really change the dynamic of the country. And most importantly, give us the resources that we need to accomplish what is the number one task in the country, which is at this point to reform and rebuild an army that can, raise the skates for any aggression on the Azeri side and hopefully bring peace to all of our borders.
Well, Eric, thank you very much for your time again.
Thank you.
And thank you, and continue following CivilNet.